In this video article, we're going to look at 5 non-writing books that I think all fiction writers should read. Before we jump into that, if you want to get an email with a time-stamped overview every time I release a new video, then head over to my website. You'll find it at deliberate-practice.com and sign up for my email list. There's other content there at the website, plus there's some thank you goodies for signing up, and I'll be adding more of those over the coming weeks and months. So, 5 books for non-writers. Following books will definitely help your writing endeavours. As you see as we go through them, I've grouped some under topics and one I haven't, but they're all, I think, books that have relevance to fiction writers of just about any stripe or genre, so do consider them and have a think about them, and I'll also say why I think you should pick these books up and read them and learn from them. Note, I've cheated on a couple of slides and treated them as topics and added in 2 slides I've added 2 books and suggested another book for one topic as well. Okay, the first topic I want to talk about is deliberate practice. And I've got 2 books for deliberate practice. The first one of those is called Talent is Overrated by a guy called Jeff Colvin. Now, this is originally published in 2008. This graphic is an image of the second edition, which was 2019, I think. I don't have the second edition, so I don't know what the additional content is in that. But the first edition had lots of really interesting content and was the book that introduced me to deliberate practice. And the reason that's important is deliberate practice is the way that you can leverage to learn to be a better writer. To do that, you need to understand deliberate practice. Now, in the writing field particularly, I've come to realize that no one really understands how to apply deliberate practice to writing. I've never seen anyone talking about it in a way that makes sense with what I understand about deliberate practice. And so, I've been using and teaching deliberate practice since 2009 with music students. The guy who's probably considered the godfather or the grandfather of deliberate practice, a guy called Anders Ericsson, sadly passed away in 2018, I think. But in the 6 months prior to him passing away, I'd started an email dialogue with him, and I'm pretty sure I've got a reasonable handle on deliberate practice. And in the upcoming weeks and months, I will be doing some video articles on how you actually go about applying deliberate practice to your writing. But to get the full value out of those, you need to understand all about how deliberate practice was discovered and how you can use it. Now, this is either the best place to start for that, or possibly this one, which is Daniel Coyle is the author, and it's called The Talent Code. This is a different take from Jeff Colvin's on talent acquisition. Actually, what I should have written on the slide is you should read both. They're both really good books. They both cover the same subject from different angles, so you learn different things from different books. Coyle has a concept that he calls talent hotbeds, which are places where there's, for some reason, whether it's the teacher or the teaching system, but where a small place will produce a statistically larger number of peak performers than it should be doing. And one of the examples that he gives is a tennis academy outside Moscow called Spartak. And at one point in the mid-2000s, there were more women in the top 20 world tennis rankings from this tennis academy, the Spartak Tennis Academy, than there were from the entire US. And when you'd hear that, you think, oh, it must be this fabulous facility with all these things. And it was actually a pretty rundown building with just one court. But you should read The Talent Code because it's got a number of stories like that. And the talent hotbed reminded me of the descriptions I've read of the science fiction workshops that used to take place in the 1980s and 1990s, the Clarion workshops. I don't know that anyone does anything like that anymore, which is a shame because they sound like they were great. And if you understand what you're doing, then all the people who take part in something like that will learn. This is also an important book because it talks about practice repetitions and myelin production in the brain and the neural circuitry that happens and the changes to it as the brain learns. So if that sounds really scientific and really complex and technical, it isn't. Daniel Coyle is a great author at taking complex subjects and teaching them in simple and clear ways. A couple of notes. A third book is Peak by Anders Ericsson. I've already mentioned Anders as the godfather of deliberate practice. Jeff Colvin's book is very much based on on Ericsson's research, whereas Daniel Coyle's book is based on his own research with nods at other things. So again, you could read this as well. All three of those books will give you a good grounding in understanding deliberate practice. Neither of the books that I mentioned or Peak cover a concept called deliberate play, though Daniel Coyle touches upon it when he talks about why Brazilian footballers are so good. And this concept is really an important. For 5 or 6 years, there's been I knew there was a missing link in my understanding of deliberate practice, and I came across this concept recently, and it's completed my mental representations of deliberate practice, how the different things how the different disciplines of it work and how they go together and how someone could use them to become a better. Initially, I was training musicians and using deliberate practice principles, but a better writer. And as I say, I'm going to be doing some video articles on that. Neither of these books or Peak by Anders Ericsson are aimed at writers, just so you know. They're very much general books, so you have to start taking the examples, taking the suggestions and thinking about how you could apply them to writing. Or you can wait till I do some video articles and you'll get to see my thoughts on how you would apply those principles and those practice principles and learning principles to becoming a better writer. Okay, the second topic and book is flow, and the book that I'm recommending, and there's only one book in this topic, is The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler. Now, I think flow is the second most important skill writers should study. This video is not about flow, so I'm not going to go into it in massive detail, but flow is basically a mental state that peak performers in lots of disciplines experience. So you'll hear athletes sometimes talking about their running and they get into the zone and suddenly they're running and it's effortless. That's flow, and it works with writing as well. If you've ever experienced where you're sat down and you're writing and suddenly if you type like I do, you're writing away and you're going as fast as you can and you can't keep up with the words that are coming to your head and it feels like you're taking dictation from someone sat on your shoulder, that's flow. And the thing about getting into flow that's important for writers is it accesses the subconscious part of the brain, and generally when you write in flow, the quality of the writing is higher than if you write and you're not in flow. And it also allows for faster production, and if you've got your basics down, which is what deliberate practice is for in terms of technical things, you can basically produce more words at higher quality than if you're not writing in flow. Kotler lays out what flow is, what flow triggers are, things about motivations, stuff like that. And again, he's another author who is able to take technical jargon filled kind of science-based material and turn it into writing that's much more understandable for laymen or people who are not scientifically minded in those particular subjects. So this is a really good book. I think it's in paperback now, so it's relatively inexpensive, and Stephen Kotler's dedicated his life to studying flow, so he's definitely an expert in it. So I definitely think you should read this book. And as I mentioned, it's an important component of peak performance. And the other important part of it is if you can set up flow triggers for yourself, you can trigger peak performance almost at will. It's a little bit more complex than that, but read this book to find out more. The next topic we're going to look at is marginal gains, and the book that represents this best, I think, is Black Box Thinking. Matthew Syed's also written a book called Bounce, which is another deliberate practice book. So if you want to read another basic deliberate practice book, you could check that out. There's a couple of good things in Bounce. He details scientifically the concept of choking in a way that I've never seen anyone in sports writing write before. So if you don't know Matthew, sorry, he used to be a world champion table tennis player, and he now writes for the Times. For a long time he was a sports writer for the Times, but he writes about politics and other subjects as well, and he's a good writer. But marginal gains, as I say, I haven't really seen any other work on marginal gains, certainly nothing that is of this quality. And basically marginal gains, and I'll come back to that bullet point. In fact, let me take that off the screen. So marginal gains, basically, it was first, I think, the concept was first generated by the England World Cup rugby team, World Cup winning rugby team of 2003. And the coach at the time and his coaching team identified that the 4 or 5 top teams in the world were separated by tiny margins, like 1 or 2%. And so what they set out to do, they couldn't find any lever that they could pull on that would catapult the English rugby team up by 5% or 10% and put them clearly above the competing teams. So what they instead set out to do was identify 100 areas, I think it was, and try and make a 0.5% or a 1% gain in each of those areas. And that's marginal gains in a nutshell. And it's been taken on by a guy called Dave Brailsford with the English and UK and Sky cycling teams. And they've done extraordinary things using marginal gains to improve the performance. So that's what marginal gains is. In terms of you as a writer, if you're an elite writer, so if you were someone, let's have a think who I'd be thinking of. A name doesn't come to mind particularly, but if you were at the top of your game and you wanted to rise above your competitors, marginal gains would be what you would use. For most of you, you won't be at that level. But the thing about it is you can use the concept and you can adapt it. And when it's adapted, I call that concept maximum impact gains rather, not games. So what that concept is that you identify a smaller number of items to practice on, maybe 5, certainly no more than 10. The smaller the better, 4 or 5 maybe. And you practice those, and those topic areas that you're practicing have been particularly, or specifically would be a better word, specifically selected to give the maximum leverage possible and to make the overall improvement in your writing as great as possible. Now, it would be great if I could just say, if you take these 5 things and work on them, work on 1 a month for the next 6 months, at the end of that period, you'll be 20%, 30%, 40% better. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that because each of us is at a different place. We have our own strengths and weaknesses. So this is the kind of thing you have to think carefully about and work carefully on. I'll talk about the 80-20 principle as the last of our topic stroke books. And the 80-20 principle can help you identify what topic areas you need to work on. But if you need to understand marginal gains first, and Black Box Thinking is a really interesting, well-written, well-argued non-fiction book that's worth reading just for reading it if you like books like that. But you'll also get some knowledge that you can then take away, that you can throw into your melting pot in your brain for working on improvements. I'll be talking about maximum impact gains at some stage in video articles as well. So yeah, I just mentioned all this. You need to identify exactly what you need, and it will vary depending on your level. Okay, on to the fourth. This book doesn't have a topic. I've just called it by its name. It's called Effortless Mastery, and it's by a guy called Kenny Werner. And it's very unlikely you've heard of him because he's not a writer. He's a jazz pianist. And the reason I've included this is because the discipline that I've experienced that's not writing, that's closest to writing in flow, is jazz improvisation. And this book's all about jazz improvisation, but it's about overcoming self-doubt and tapping into the space where you'll find your creativity. And kind of like the core message of the book is not trying to control your creativity, but surrendering to it. It's about losing the ego part of your personality to let the creative part of your personality come to the front. I think if anyone here writes in flow, writes their stories in flow, I think you'll find this book really interesting. There's a second book that Kenny's brought out in 2022, which I think is called something like Becoming the Musician Within or something like that. I've not read that one yet. I imagine it's like a follow-up to that. So if you like this, you'll probably like that. At some stage I will get round to that. But my to-be-read pile has got 200 books on it. So until I suddenly decide, I probably need to read this, it's not on that pile just yet. Okay. The last topic we're going to look at is called the 80-20 principle, or Pareto's principle. And there are two books here, as you can see. One is called 80-20 Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall, and the other one is called 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch. And the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto's principle, is that 80% of your efforts, 80% of the success of something you're doing usually comes from 20% of your activities. So both authors, I think, make the point that the numbers aren't always exactly 80-20. Sometimes it might be 70-30, or sometimes it might be 90-10. But as a general scientific principle, it holds remarkably true. And in Perry's book, he also goes a level deeper, and it's fractal. So if, for example, you took, let's say, the top 20% of your customer list, let's say you run a business, Perry is a sales and marketing kind of guy, the top 20% of your client list will provide approximately 80% of the revenue generated. But if you then take the top 20% of the 20%, which would be 4, or 5, they would generate 80% of 80% of the revenue, which would be 64% of your revenue. So if you know that, and then you can identify the characteristics of the top 4 or 5% of your client list, you can then go looking for more of those people to boost your revenues much more than if you try and look for clients who are like the bottom 5% of your client list, for example, in terms of how much they spend and how much of a pain in the ass they are. All those kind of criteria that you would rate your business clients to be. The same thing applies with writing, and I talked about this with maximum gain impact or maximum impact gains, and how you would use the 80-20 principle. And it may be that if you're serious about getting better at writing, you'll have to find someone who can function as a writing mentor for you and who can help you with this. But if you can look at all the possible things that you could do to improve your writing and identify somewhere between 2 and 5 that will have the most impact in terms of making you a better writer, making you a more productive writer, making your stories better received, then logic tells us that if we work on those first, rather than things that make a small difference, but that difference is tiny, if we can identify the things that make the biggest difference and practice those first, that will have the most effect on our writing. And when I talk about deliberate practice and using deliberate practice, I'll talk about these concepts in those video articles. But again, grab one of these books, because the 80-20 principles, a really important principle that you should know about if you don't know about it. And which one you should grab: if you're definitely a sales and marketing kind of guy, you should get Perry's book. If you're more a general kind of writer and a reader and you do various things but you're not really a sales and marketing guy, you should get Richard's book. They're both really good books. I've got them both, and Richard's written, I've lost count of the number of follow-ups, and I've got 2 or 3 of those as well. But it's another thing that if you understand, and then more importantly, if you understand it and work out how to apply it, it will have positive downstream effects on your writing and your writing endeavors. So those are the 5 topics / books that I wanted to talk about in this video. Hopefully I've presented books that you've not heard of and has given you food for thought, and you think, yes, I'll get that one and that one and that one. They're all of the books I've recommended will help in your writing and in your understanding of other things as well. As I've mentioned several times already through the course of this video, I'll be adding content, video content, on applying deliberate practice to fiction writing. There'll definitely be some stuff going into the writing vault, and probably some email subscriber only stuff happening as well. Just so you know, I have a course on how I learned to apply flow and the specific flow triggers that I use. And I set out, I taught a student how to do this, and I've basically documented the process I did. If you wanted to learn how to do that, just drop me an email and I'll give you some more details. But read Stephen's book before anything, so you get a thorough grounding and understanding in flow and flow concepts. If you want to send me an email, my email address is paul@deliberate-practice.com, and that's where deliberate-practice.com is where you can sign up for the email list as well. And also, if you're an aspiring and/or frustrated fiction writer and putting a resource together called the Writing Vault, and you can see it at the URL. You can see the URL in front of you. There'll be a link in the description for this video. Go and check that out. See if it's something that you think, yeah, actually that sounds like it will help me. It definitely will, and I've got big plans for it in the coming weeks and months. If you're not sure, send me some questions, and I'll answer them truthfully and honestly. If I don't think you're a fit, I'll tell you you're not a fit, and if I think you are, I'll tell you honestly that you are. Anyway. Thank you for watching. I hope some of these books help you with your understanding on core educational topics that will help with your development of writing in the coming months and years for you. And thank you for your time today, and I'll catch you in the next video.